and welcome to the Australian Roundtable podcast. It is Sunday the 14th of December, and this is episode 10 of our weekly broadcast live at youtube.com/Australian Roundtable from 4pm Australian Eastern Standard Time every Sunday, and also archived on the same channel for later listening if you can't tune in live. I'm your host, Jono, and I'm pleased to be joined in the studio as usual by my co-panelist Ethan Nash of TOTT News. Thanks for being here.
Good to be here.
And we're fortunate to again have the company of the smiling assassin, Lindsay. Thanks for joining us, mate.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here.
All right. Now, if you're new to the show, the Australian Roundtable podcast is a Brisbane-based independent news analysis discussion panel podcast. The show features an eclectic panel of presenters who come together each week to discuss recent and topical news and current affairs from Australia and around the world. Views presented by panelists and guests are not necessarily representative of the entire panel. Each presenter is solely responsible for his or her own comments and claims. All information cited during the show can be found with links at our website, ozroundtable.com. Episodes generally run for about 90 minutes, and timestamps are provided at the YouTube channel so you can skip forward to the segments that you like. And although it's a roundtable, we generally keep to a good, rough structure for each episode. And I'll get to today's rundown right now. On the domestic segment, we're going to discuss some more courier mail fun, the Queensland Police and corporate sponsorship, more police shootings here in Queensland, and then a big, broad discussion on feminism in Australia. And then we'll get on to the international segment where we'll discuss the CIA torture report, the Peru climate talks, and, of course, the Sandy Hook anniversary. Because, boys, today is the 2-year anniversary of the Sandy hoax. I can't wait to get to that topic. All right, so we'll get straight into the domestic segment. Now, I just wanted to start off with a little thing I saw in the Courier Mail. And this is from, I think, the 4th of December 2014, Courier Mail. Children burst into tears after Santa jumps into police van at end of family Christmas parade. This is from the article. Children were left sobbing and traumatized after seeing Santa hauled away in a police riot van after a family Christmas parade. The not-so-merry incident occurred after Santa attended a holiday parade in Aberdare, Wales, before hopping into a police vehicle at the end, reports the South Wales Evening Post. Shocked children started crying when they saw Santa Claus apparently being taken away by police officers. Furious parents have slammed the parade organisers for upsetting their kids. There were a lot of tears. People couldn't believe it actually happened. My 4-year-old cousin started crying, saying, Santa can't bring me toys now, said Jade Hughes, who said the shock ending to Santa's day out ruined an otherwise fantastic event. End quote. Now, some of our regular listeners might be wondering, what on earth does that have to do with anything? We like to start the show off with something that we can laugh about, because obviously a lot of the topics that we discuss can get a bit heavy and deep. So I thought, when I read that one during the week, I thought, yeah, I'm gonna discuss that one, because
some more quality reporting by the Courier Mail.
Yes. Anyway, now let's get into some more serious stuff, and we'll go to the police and corporate sponsorship. Ethan, I know you wanted to discuss something that happened in the last week or two to do with corporate sponsorship of our police force here in Queensland.
Yes. Some interesting developments that I found throughout the week. Earlier this week, it was revealed that Queensland Police Force has a new corporate sponsor, and people, including myself, are not impressed at all. The Queensland Police Force is confident its integrity has not been breached by accepting funds from mining company Santos for a road safety campaign after vehicles with the company's name on them were photographed in New South Wales. Santos has funneled $40,000 to the Queensland Police Service as a major sponsor of the Queensland Police Service's Stay on Track Outback campaign, involving 3 non-operational vehicles decorated with road safety graphics, a motorhome and 2 utes driving around Western Queensland and New South Wales. Now, for some background for people who may not be familiar with Santos, particularly our international viewers, Santos is Australia's largest domestic gas producer, supplying sales gas to all mainland Australian states and territories, and oil and liquids to domestic and international customers, among many other things. Santos' production for 2008 was 54 million barrels of oil equivalent. Earnings before interest, taxes, and all of that was $2.8 billion, representing after-tax a profit of $1.65 billion for last year. Now, right off the bat, 2 problems arise here. Number one, surely, just looking at this on the bare surface, there has to be a conflict of interest here. I mean, you'd be crazy to not think this. And I mean, to have Australia's largest gas producer sponsoring the service that is supposed to serve the people is appalling, in my opinion. I think it's really appalling. And number two, what does this mean for protesting was the thing that I thought of immediately. What does this mean for protesting? Now, as you and I, Lindsay, and Jono as well, we all know that there's a large movement against Santos and other coal seam gas projects in Queensland and abroad the country. And we've already spoken on Tasmania and the restrictions some protesters have down there in regards to other actions and how, protesters are being restricted everywhere in this country. So who is to say that police won't be openly biased and non-objective to protesters against Santos? And, where will the accountability be? So for those, I'll link in the info box on the official upload when we put it, a photo of these vehicles. You can see the Santos company logo is on it with the Outback design for this road safety campaign. So it's just blatant sponsorship. But despite this, Queensland Police Commissioner Ian Stewart has said he was confident that the project is not a conflict of interest. Quote, "There are some people who may have a perception of a conflict in any sponsorship that we get, but that's why we have a very clear policy," he said, end quote. "We sign contracts so everyone knows what the ground rules are, and there's only a conflict of interest in my opinion." It's his opinion, Lindsay. "If we were to give someone preferential treatment, and that's not what we do." But let's take a look at some of these policies that have said. Now, I couldn't find the Queensland Police endorsement policies and guidelines, but I did find the New South Wales one, and my estimation is it would be pretty similar. And if it's not similar, then that means that it's just blatant proof that Queensland Police are excluded and isolated with their own, powers that are not what the rest of the country has as well. But the Queensland Police one, it's the New South Wales policy summary under section 1.2 says endorsement occurs when the police force gives approval or support to an organisation, individual, product, service or activity. Endorsement is either commercial or non-commercial. Now, commercial endorsement occurs when a business receives commercial benefit or profit through association with the police force. Commercial endorsement is completely prohibited under this. The police force does not endorse organisations, individuals, products, services, and authorities where the endorsement will result in a commercial benefit. Now, the non-commercial endorsement occurs when an event or activity organised by a government agency, not-for-profit community organisation, or charity is publicly supported by the police force, and the benefit it receives does not involve a commercial benefit or profit.
Okay.
So, just looking at this, I mean, this is absolutely appalling how we're seeing these major companies on the side of Queensland police cars that have just come out and they're trying to tell us there's no conflict of interest, where in New South Wales, non-commercial endorsement only is when it's a non-profit community organisation, a charity or a government agency that is doing this.
Yeah. And
we've got one of the most profitable companies in Australia, one of the most profitable organisations in Australia sponsoring our police. What do you think, Lindsay?
Yeah. No, I think it's appalling. I kept thinking about the people who would be protesting at their properties, at their gates, and then the police roll up when they're trying to stop these gas people going on their properties. To me, that's a really bad sign. I mean, it's bad enough. We already know there is no justice in Queensland. That's just... Anyway, I won't go on about that now, but we already know that. So this is really quite appalling, and it's bad for the police.
Yeah.
How are you going to enforce the law if everybody perceives you as being corrupt? That's simple as that. That's the way I see it.
Absolutely.
There's only one other thing I was just thinking of now while you were reading that. I can remember years ago there was a border or a cross-border organisation to do with water between Queensland and New South Wales, and it fell apart because you can't use one state's revenue to be for the benefit of another state. And I'm just wondering whether that's, if they're doing something going both into New South Wales and Queensland, they've used that to get around that rule by using company money. It's not Queensland money, if that makes sense, or New South Wales money. And I'm just wondering whether that's what that's about. But doesn't matter. It's not right.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be happening.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
And to say that there's no conflict of interest, it's just, I mean, they obviously the listeners can't see the photo, but the photo of the article that you've got there shows these cars with the Santos insignia. That insignia could say, sponsored by Santos, clear conflict of interest, and the police would still stand there and say, no conflict of interest. Yeah. They can say whatever they want. They can lie blatantly. That's the situation we're in at the moment. People are so apathetic and just completely distracted from what's happening that they should be upset just that they're being lied to like this. Put aside the conflict of interest. You're treating us like idiots. But the people, the vast majority of them, are quite happy to be treated like an idiot so long as they're getting their bread in their circuses. And for the time being, they're getting plenty of bread and plenty of circuses. The problem's going to be when any of that dries up, which it may well do sooner than people realise.
Yeah. And I just wanted to read out, finally, just a comment on the TOTT News Facebook page from a supporter called John, who, when I posted the photo, so you can go to the TOTT News Facebook page, or it will be in the description of the video when it's uploaded, to see these cars. John said, I cannot see how Santos would not fall within the commercial category. But then I find the whole idea of police assets used to promote any private organisation, commercial or non-commercial, to be a questionable concept from an ethical point of view. As you said, Ethan, how can police be seen to be unbiased with this in place? And that's exactly what it is, the perception of this. And that was an interesting point you brought up, Lindsay. As I've read out the New South Wales policies, Queensland Police have been driving these cars into New South Wales where it's prohibited to do this. Yeah. So where is... I understand what you're saying with that. It's just... I just thought I'd bring this up because I thought there was an unbelievable development where if this would have happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, if there was corporations with their logos on the side of police cars, people would be up in arms about this.
Well, they wouldn't even let people assist tuck shops in schools because of that sort of thing. They have to. Otherwise, you'd find that they'd be flogging their rubbish food or something in there. No, they put a ban to all this, and yet these people, seem to be done. Yeah, we can see what it's seen to be done.
Look, I just want to make a couple of quick points on that. Firstly, when you say that even 10 years ago people wouldn't have got away with this, I think you're probably right. It seems as though we're witnessing a very fast deterioration in the values that used to be upheld, even ostensibly. And I wonder, why is there this sudden deterioration of why are they being so brazen? I think it ties into some of the other things that we've discussed recently on the show and what we might discuss later on as well. And the second point is, if you look at what fascism is, or if you look at what totalitarian is, it's a merging of the state and the business interests. Slowly but surely, the government and private business become one and the same thing. And this is only a small example of it, but it's a typical example, and this is the way these things can creep in. If people are accepting of this, what else will they be accepting of? That's what I always ask. If this is enough to get people, writing their MPs or voting out these same major parties or even, calling into their radio stations or whatever, if this isn't enough to get people to care, you have to wonder what would have to happen. Like, how blatant would they have to be? That's what I wonder sometimes. And you know what? I think we're going to find out in our lifetimes. They're going to keep pushing this, and it's going to happen very soon. But we do need to press on. And related to the Queensland Police issue, I know that you've brought in more information for us, Lindsay, about shootings.
When you're saying that about how they just fob off everything, it doesn't matter how blatant it is, they just fob it off. I've noticed that the police commissioner has been a bit twitchy for the last week or so, because there have been 4 shootings this month, and I think it's 7 for the year. Now, I brought in a cutting out of today's Sunday Mail, if I can just read that.
Please do. Yeah.
The basic thing about it was that this was a policeman who was speaking, so they must be starting to feel the heat. This was I think he described him as an older policeman. Those 7 police shootings this year highlight the need for the force to present the best possible image. Too often, police are seen wearing their riot gear and heavy equipment. What happened to the sky blue police shirts? They only seem to be worn in courts. And some plainclothes police are a dead giveaway wearing utility belts. It reminds me of Papua New Guinea. They'd be plainclothes policemen with the black boots on. Anyway, sorry. Like you're going to fool anybody. Anyway. One cop complained to Traps, which is the section of the paper. This was a thing called something about traps, around the traps or something like that. Complained to Traps, the dark blue fatigues was one reason he was ready to quit. Quote, I thought this was Queensland 2014, not Nazi Germany in 1944, end of quote, wrote Officer X. Too confidential for dealing with the law-abiding public was this old copper's rating. And I'm just hoping that there are more and more of these people who can start to see that this really isn't very good for them. They might be getting away for it now, but sooner or later there's going to be absolute rage against the police force. And these poor people who can see that it's wrong are also going to be affected when it comes. I mean, there are plenty of poems about the Anglo-Saxon when you get angry and things like that. We had the Peasants' Revolt in 1381 and they hacked everybody's heads off so they could lay their hands on. These people aren't stupid. They know that eventually we're going to get absolutely pissed off with this and we'll be coming looking for them. Yeah. They know that.
And, well, in relation to that, before we went on air, we were talking about the Queensland Police Force and how they've become more and more militarised and they're making it being accepted into the public. With the Philip Hughes death. Posting on their official Facebook page specialist response teams in complete, disturbing Iraq-type wear. And it's just...
For the international listeners, it's worth giving the background. So cricket is a very popular sport in Australia, and especially in the summertime, it's almost like a tradition, even to this day, in most Australian families. Maybe not so much the immigrant families who make up a large percentage of our population these days, but certainly for any Australian families that have been here for more than a generation, cricket is a huge part of the summer. And a national cricketer died playing cricket a few weeks ago, and there has been a massive, public outpouring of emotion. And a photo was released by the Queensland Police Special Response Team, Special Emergency Response Team, CERT, dressed up, and we'll link to this in the information box underneath the YouTube video, dressed up in their full tactical gear with their machine guns, with a police bat, supposedly in honour of the fallen cricketer. And when I first saw this photo, I thought this has to be a piece of satire. Someone has taken a CERT photo team, photoshopped in the cricket bat, and then released this, trying to make a point about how crazy our police have gotten militarised. I was certain that's what it was, a satirical piece. Ethan brought it up with me when I saw him a few days later, and he said, no, that was legitimate. And I was like, I don't think it was legitimate, dude. I'm pretty sure you've been conned. So I went and looked into it. No, this was actually legitimate. They actually took a photo of their Special Emergency Response Team, fully decked out in their tactical gear with balaclavas and heavy machine guns, with a cricket bat supposedly in support of a dead... How sick is this? How utterly sick is this? You know what they're doing. They're just normalising the militarised police. Seriously, we all get fooled, okay? You're not in this game unless you admit that sometimes you're wrong. That's the whole point. You only start waking up to stuff when you are humble enough to admit that you can be fooled. Whether it's the Sandy Hook hoax, whether it's 9/11, whether it's Port Arthur, whatever it is, only people who are willing to admit that they've been fooled are likely to be doing the kind of work that we're doing. And I'm happy to admit now, I was fooled. I saw that photo and it was actually in my mind saying, bravo to whoever has put together this satire. But you're in a bad place when even stuff that looks like it's clearly satire is actually legitimate.
No, it was unbelievable. And that's why and I watched it, and the people that I've spoken to about it said that it's a legitimate, scary, disturbing photo. It embodies everything that the police state in 1984 would look like if it was in a photo shoot. They're decked to the rim with all of this gear, and it's supposed to be for this light-hearted, or this. It's supposed to be a tribute. It's supposed to be something happy that the Queensland Police Force have recognised this cricketer. Out of respect, we're paying tribute to it, and it's just turned into this professional black and white photo shoot. It's just unbelievable. Unbelievable.
What gets me was this fellow I just quoted a minute ago, the old copper who didn't like the idea of them wearing their tactical gear around or whatever. He understands, but I start to wonder about the commissioner and deputy commissioners. Have they got such a bad moral compass they don't even understand how bad this is? They obviously think this is acceptable. Well, it's not bloody acceptable. We're telling you now. It's not acceptable.
We don't think it's acceptable, but I'll tell you this. I saw that CERT photo that we just discussed. The only time I'd previously seen Australian police, a photo of Australian police decked out like that, was that article that I mentioned a couple of weeks ago of that drug bust that happened. I think it was in Sydney. And the photos that were on the mainstream articles discussing this big drug bust, what did they have? Sure enough, they had the baddies, handcuffed on the ground, and who's standing over them? But people in that same tactical gear. Now you have to ask yourself, why did the photographer frame it like that? Why did whoever, the editor or whoever published it? There's a reason. I mean, one of the things about going through this process of deprogramming your brain from the television or waking up or doing your own research, whatever you call this, one of the elements that you have to realize is, wow, everything that's done on the news is done for a reason. So then you ask, what's the reason for this? Well, it's obvious what the reason is. They're normalizing the police being dressed up even more heavily kitted out than the guys that we sent to Iraq 10 years ago. I mean, seriously, look at the photos of the soldiers from just over 10 years ago going to Iraq 2.0 and then compare that to our police. If it's a 8-on-8 battle between the CERT and the guys we were sending to Iraq and Afghanistan, these CERT guys mop them up. And if you look into these CERT teams, you find a lot of them are ex-military anyhow. So these are big guys, these are well-trained guys, these are very well kitted out guys, looking scary as hell, and we see them popping up in photos for drug busts. Then we see them popping up in tributes to dead sports stars. I mean, this stuff is messed up.
Seriously messed up.
No, well, during the week, I just wrote a letter to my local, well, he's not mine, my mother's local politician, and I'm asking him, are these fellas being trained in Israel? Because there was a thing on YouTube some time ago by an ex-Israeli soldier talking about all the American police forces are being trained by going to Israel or being trained by Israelis because they've got the background on cleaning up Palestinians. They know how to go about it. And that worries me because that is army.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you can find that YouTube video, we'll link to that in the info box. And I don't think I made it clear enough at the start of the show. If you're a new listener, all the claims that we make, all the articles that we quote and all these kinds of things, we provide all the links. And not only do we provide it there so you can do your own research, we encourage you to. There's nothing that I'm going to read out today or on any episode that I want you to just believe from me. You need to go and read it for yourself because that's when it will really get planted in your mind what's happening here. And the same thing will go for that video that you just mentioned. Lindsay, you find that, email me, I'll chuck it on the website. Now, we have got to, unless there's any more final thoughts on the police, we're going to move on to the big feature piece that we've been talking about for weeks now, Lindsay, and that is feminism in Australia. Now, both of you guys missed last week's show. I was fortunate enough to have Raja B on with me as a guest, and we spent about half an hour talking about cultural Marxism and the way that it's infected our society here in Australia and other Western countries. Cultural Marxism is the broader problem, but then there are strands within it. And one of those main ones is what I call second wave feminism and what that has done to society. Now, I know you've got lots to talk about today, Lindsay, to do with this second wave feminism. Before you do, I just want to give a brief background to people who might not be familiar with some of this terminology. First wave feminism was something that came about particularly in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And this was about women fighting for equal rights under the law. So things to do with contracts and marriage, parenting and property, basically so they could be recognised under the law as being full citizens. That's what the first wave feminism was about. Of course, that led to the suffrage movement. And by 1902 in Australia, women had the vote. That was what first wave feminism was. And I don't think any sane person could have a problem with any of that. Second wave feminism really reached its zenith in the 1960s with people like Betty Friedan, who wrote The Feminine Mystique in 1963, and Gloria Steinem, who wrote After Black Power, Women's Liberation in 1969. These were two of the leading figures of what we now call second wave feminism. This wasn't about equal rights under law, though. This was about supposed social and cultural inequalities. And it was really what you might now call about gender politics. And it got to a point where it was talking about males oppressing women and the patriarchy and all of these things that people now associate with feminism. They had nothing to do with feminism up until the 1960s. Feminism started off as people, not just women, men and women, saying, give women equal rights under law. What we now call feminism is something very, very, very different. And if you look into what we call second wave feminism in the 1960s, you can see that for yourself. Now, I've got more that I want to talk about with all of this, Lindsay, but that's the basic background I wanted to give, because I suspect that what you're about to talk about isn't feminism as equal rights under law. It's about feminism as gender politics, and that's the point that I always make to people. When I am criticizing what is now called feminism, I am not criticizing what was previously called feminism. Some of those early suffragettes were heroes, heroines. They were fantastic. I don't want to disparage any of the work that they did. It's the people from the 1960s onwards and their agenda. That's the big issue. And it's such a shame that they hijacked the word feminism. So now it all gets tarred with the same brush. Now, with that long-winded background, Lindsay, you've got plenty of material there, mate. Take it away.
Okay. Well, first of all, I agree with you there. I would like, if you would because I'm going to be reading a fair bit.
Yeah,
so
man.
would you read something for me?
Sure.
This was from a previous podcast that we did, and I don't want you to read the whole lot. I just want you to read the bits in red. And the reason I want to do that is it was from my letter to the New South Wales Minister for Education about an inquiry into boys educators in 1994. And they mesh into another article from the US that I want you to read that talks about where this stuff came from. And it's really just about family and social engineering, and that's all it is. It's just as you've just said. It's nothing to do with equal rights or whatever. It's just engineering. It would appear that there was a concerted effort at social engineering throughout the Anglo-Saxon countries. And that's what I think triggered it, is that my answer to the Minister for Education... Yeah, my answer to the Minister for Education was totally independent. I'd not heard of any of these other things in America or elsewhere, and it seems as if it was being done in all the Anglo-Saxon countries at the same time. So that's a concerted thing. I was talking once before about banking and changes, and that happened as well, where suddenly everybody had to have 100 points on them for a bank account. It all happened in all the Anglo-Saxon countries, all at the same time. And people say, "Oh no, it was independent." Oh yeah, thanks.
So, is there something you wanted me to read out here?
Yeah, I will. If you wouldn't mind doing that, just the bits in red, please.
All right. So, the first of the 5 terms of reference established the tone and direction of the report. The second term of reference followed this up. This is made quite clear under what are we trying to achieve. The emerging debate over boys' education, following as it does some 20 years of feminist thought on the issue of gender equity, provides an opportunity to refocus our goals. The way forward is to develop an overall gender equity strategy, all in capitals, involving programs for boys, extensions of the current programs for girls, and gender education programs aimed at both. This approach is in line with much feminist thought and will clearly benefit girls and women. To put it simply, most feminists want boys and men to change so that they cause less problems for girls and women and themselves, so the sexes can live alongside each other in a safe, secure, stable, respectful, harmonious way and in relationships of mutual, life-enhancing respect. Feminists have long made the case that gender plays a part in all aspects of education, and that to recognise this is to get a particularly useful insight into a lot of educational issues and problems. End quote. So, Lindsay, what on earth did I just read out there? Was that your letter to the...
No. That's from...
That's from the terms of reference
of the inquiry into boys' education.
Jesus.
Yeah, that's my point, right?
So this is the terms of reference for an inquiry in 1994 into boys' education.
Yeah, and so you just... If you go over that, and that's the point I'm trying to make. And it just didn't end there. But you talk about life enhancing and all this sort of stuff. The mind just boggles.
This was when I was going through primary school, by the way.
Yeah. So, and what I'm trying to get at is I was on a school council, so I came across this, and I went down to the library and I started looking into feminist literature, and I come up with this stuff, and I thought, this is unbelievable. Yep. And they didn't like it. I mean, they just refused to accept what I'd said. But now I go back and I see the same happened in America at the same time. So this is a concerted effort. That's the point I was trying to make. Yeah.
So, okay, now that I know what it was I was reading out, let me read that out again.
Yeah,
so this is, and I haven't had a chance to double check what you've told me. I'm going to go and double check all of this, but I'm happy to take your word for now. This is from the terms of reference in 1994 in an inquiry into boys' education.
In New South Wales.
In New South Wales. To put it simply, most feminists want boys and men to change so that they cause less problems for girls and women and themselves, so the sexes can live alongside each other in a safe, secure, stable, respectful, harmonious way, and in relationships of mutual life-enhancing respect. This is incredible.
Sorry, so you see what I'm talking.
Look now, Lindsay, I'm a very sceptical person, I will have to go and double-check this, but unfortunately with you bring in stuff that I think is crazy. I go and double-check it, and it's legitimate. So, listeners, I can't vouch for what you just told me, but I'll double-check this. I don't know what to say.
No.
Ethan, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah. No, I think it's unbelievable.
Yeah,
And you did touch on this a couple of episodes ago. It's just...
So anyway, I won't labour it.
And you're just getting started.
Yeah, yeah.
I've got a whole stack of courier mail. It's making me nauseous, to be honest. No.
Yeah, but that's not coming from you. I wanted you, so that my voice won't drive people crazy after a while, I thought I'd let you read that.
No, you're a smarter man than that. You wanted me to read that so it would sink in what's going on here. I get it. All right.
Okay. Anyway, so after that, I just, that was to set the tone, and I will get you to read something else in a minute, and it will show the same stuff, and it was brought into the US from communist Russia, and it will tell you who brought it in, and he will give the name, and it'll be a member of the tribe, and so you'll get the picture of what's going on. That's pretty much what I want. So if I give you that, would you read all this stuff for you to read? Okay, down to there, because that's the name of the man. So
you want to read this paragraph?
Yeah. Oh, well, you can read that because it's so much.
All the highlighted stuff down to that one. All right. Before I do this, I should know what I'm reading out. So this is the Constitutionality of Child Support Guidelines Debate, Part 2. And you found this...
on the internet, and I will give you...
And it's by Roger F. Gay. So what's the context for what I'm about to read out? Who is this and what...
Well, there is certain things happening in the US to do with families, and they credit it back to this one particular state, and then this gives you the background to it. Where it come from, who brought it in.
But who's Roger F. Gay, the author of what I'm about to read? Who's he?
I can't give you an exact answer to that. I'll have to go back to the website and tell you. He did the research
He's an independent researcher. And all right. So I'll read out this highlighted part. Quote. This is from May 22, 2002, by the way, and we'll have the links available for people to check this out. Obviously, I'm going to have to do that myself because I have no idea what this is, but I'll give this a go. Quote, on February 25, 2002, Superior Court Judge C. Dane Perkins declared the Georgia State Child Support Guidelines null and void because they violate numerous provisions of the Constitution of both the United States and the state of Georgia. In a spontaneous retort, the chair of the ABA's Child Support Committee, Laura Morgan, promised 2 articles in rebuttal. This is a response to her second article, The Constitutionality of Child Support Guidelines, Part 2. References to previous articles are given below. When child support reforms were being considered in the period 1975 to 1995, little to no research had been done in relation to the underlying issues. It was an age of special interest heaven in which fathers, as part of the genetically flawed group, men, were depicted as monsters who thoughtlessly abandoned wives and children in epidemic proportions. It was claimed that strict enforcement of child support orders would significantly reduce, if not eliminate, poverty. The article goes on. Laura Morgan claims that application of the guideline has not had an adverse impact on fathers. She further argues that there is a rational reason for treating fathers differently. Therefore, an adverse impact on fathers is constitutionally acceptable. The war against fathers, men generally in Western civilization along with it, was intense and is still too fresh in our minds for Laura Morgan to ignore the intent to cause harm. It was a time of such blatant and sinister political extremism that when Congress was debating the closing of military bases as part of the post-Cold War reforms, an alternative proposal by Senator Christopher Dodd, Democratic, Connecticut, was to transform the bases into forced labor camps for fathers who fell 1 or 2 months behind in child support payments. Okay, so I've just read out a huge chunk of that, Lindsay, and what do you want to elaborate on based on that?
Okay. The major point of this was that it was during this period that Erwin Garfinkel, head of the Wisconsin Institute for Research on Poverty, imported a suite of Soviet Russian policy that has become known to us as the Wisconsin model. The Child Support Guidelines 1998, the Wisconsin model, became a centerpiece for the national child support and welfare reform movement. A slightly reformed version of the Wisconsin and Georgia Child Support Guideline still survives as Article 81 of the Russian Family Code. So the point I'm trying to make is that this was imported into America, and lo and behold, at exactly the same time as we're doing that, I'm finding the same things happening in Australia, in New South Wales. Now, I won't go on with that. It was just to make the point that, and I think the name was the other thing too that I tried to bring out, Mr. Garfinkel. Because we know who was running the Russian revolution and what have you. And
Yep.
that was one of the points I was trying to make out. I'll go on now. I was going to read something out of the protocols, but I'll just skip that because I think we've got more things to discuss. Because I've laboured this before about how they talk about breaking down the family. And I won't.
Yeah, and you've made the point before that you're talking about the protocols of the Elders of Zion, and you've made the point before. It's not a matter of who wrote this thing.
No.
What is important here is a fact that was written a long time ago, and it seems to you, and it seems to a lot of people, as though a lot of the predictions or plans or whatever the hell those things were are coming to pass. Yeah. So it doesn't matter. I mean, in essence, it doesn't really matter who wrote it. What is concerning is that it's happening, and it matches all the phenomena that we're seeing around us, especially the breakdown of society. Yeah. So if you want to read out that quote from the protocols, you might as well. A lot of our listeners, they're busy people. They listen to our podcast, but they don't do as much research as you do, Lindsay. They probably haven't. Most of our listeners probably haven't read that book.
Okay, I'll be very quick. I've got to find it now. Okay, this is Protocol 10, Preparing for Power. And this is Section 5 under Protocol 10. And it says, in this way, by inculcating in all a sense of self-importance, we shall destroy among the Goyim the importance of the family and its educational value and remove the possibility of individual minds splitting off. For the mob, handled by us, will not let them come to the front, nor even give them a hearing. It is accustomed to listening to us only, and it'll pay obedience and attention to us. So the point I'm trying to make with that is that was their whole idea, was that they were going to destroy the family. And they've pretty much, that's what this feminist business is.
Absolutely.
I've got other books, but I want, it's such a huge topic that we might only get through a part of it, but we can always revisit it another time for a little more. There have been many articles in the Courier Mail over the last 2 weeks, and I got to the stage where I was thinking, does somebody know we're going to do this podcast? And they're giving us all this. No, it's just unbelievable stuff.
For the listeners at home, Lindsay is known to have brought in Courier Mail articles, and this week he's brought in pretty much their entire back catalogue, and everything is all over the desk here, but it's good because we're going to get through it, and these Courier Mail articles are really important because they give a lot of context.
Yeah. Okay. Now, most of what I want to talk about today, I'm going to read sections coming from a book called The Myth of Male Power by Warren Farrell, PhD. Now, I bought this book maybe 20 years ago, specifically because at the time he was referring to a Newsweek front page with a woman in military uniform, and it said "Women Warriors Sharing the Danger." And I was quite intrigued by that because at that time women were starting to go into the Australian Armed Forces as well. Same thing. It happens all through the world at the same time. So I bought this book, and it's only just recently that I've gone back over it, and there were so many good points that he made. So I want to refer to some of these and work our way through. And when it's relevant, we'll bring in one of the Courier Mail articles that refers to the same thing, if you can bear with me. I'm going to read some of the important quotes from Farrell's book, and you may not agree with him, but it may give those on the verge of suicide as a result of family breakup the knowledge that they're not alone, and there is another way to look at their predicament. We're only dealing with a smattering of the topics dealt in this book, so I highly recommend that you buy the book and read the whole book. Now, I noticed that it is available on Pirate Bay, but I'm not advocating you do that because I'm a great believer in having paper, because any of these digital things can be redacted at some stage, where if you've got a paper, they can't do that to you. So, first of all, I'll go to page 15, and it's about history. And the point he makes is the traditional male role of hero and performer. Each history book is usually 500 pages of advertisements for the performer role. Each lesson tells him, if you perform, you will get love and respect. If you fail, you will be nothing. And I think you'll find that if you go through history, that's what you'll find. We've all had this drummed into us throughout the years. Okay, page 17. From the male point of view, feminism turned the battle of the sexes into a war in which only one side showed up. And I think that's most of us. We've got this tendency to either fight or just walk away. And I think most of us have just walked away. And that's pretty much how we are. We're just simple creatures. We're not we're not very good at debating things. Okay, I'll read a passage from page 28. There are many ways in which a woman experiences a greater sense of powerlessness than her male counterpart. The fears of pregnancy, ageing, rape, being physically overpowered. They also have less exposure to team sports and his blend of competitiveness and cooperation. From almost all industrialised nations have acknowledged these female experiences. Unfortunately, they have acknowledged only the female experiences, and they concluded that women have the problem and men are the problem. A man who has seen his marriage become alimony payments, his home become his wife's home, and his children become child support payments for those who have been turned against him, psychologically he feels that he is spending his life working for people who hate him. He feels desperate for someone to love, but fears that another marriage might ultimately leave him with another mortgage payment, another set of children who hate him, and deeper desperation. When he is called commitment phobic, he doesn't feel understood. When a man tries to keep up with his payments by working overtime, and he's told he's insensitive, or he tries to handle the stress by drinking, he's told he's a drunkard. He doesn't feel powerful, but powerless. When he feels a cry for help will be met with a stop whining, or that a plea to be heard will be met with yes, but, and that's quite a common thing, yes, but, and there's always an answer. I think if you've ever spoken to a feminist, you'll have received that. He skips past attempting suicide as a cry for help and just commits suicide. Thus, men have remained the silent sex and increasingly become the suicide sex. How is it that if any other group was singled out to register for the draft, this is the American draft, based merely on its characteristics at birth, be that group blacks, Jews, women, gays, we would immediately recognise it as genocide. But when men are singled out based on their sex at birth, men call it power. We don't call it male killing, we call it glory. And that was the point I was trying to make before.
So a lot of what you've read out is polemical and it's an opinions. Yep. Do you have facts? Like, does this author give statistics that verify?
Yeah.
Because I think in these kind of conversations, it's always best to focus on the raw data, the primary research, and then we can extrapolate from that.
That's where we were going to move on to these Courier Mail articles. Lindsay's just giving the background in these books on opinionated sort of context about why this is happening and the motives that are leading to this happening, how everything, the breaking down, the singleizing out of men, everything is leading to these rates, and then the Courier Mail has been reporting on this recently.
Okay. Would you like to read that?
Yep.
Article?
Yep. So, page 28 of the Courier Mail on Sunday, November 30, 2014, and this is an interesting article here, Alarming Data on Youth Suicide by Lauren Wilson, and this is: children as young as 3 are being hospitalised for harming themselves, according to a groundbreaking report on youth suicide and self-harm in Australia. Tabling a report to the Parliament this week showed 18,227 children and young people were hospitalised in Australia for intentional self-harm in the last 5 years. Quote, one child under 18 every week takes their own life, and between 50 and 60 children every week are admitted to hospital for self-harming incidents.
Okay. So in this book, he makes the point that until boys and girls are 9, their suicide rates are identical. From 10 to 14, the boys' rate is twice as high as the girls'. From 15 to 19, 4 times as high. And from 20 to 24, 6 times as high. As boys experience the pressure of the male role, their suicide rates increases 25,000%. The suicide rate for men over 85 is 1,350% higher than women of the same age group. And I think that's what we've been coming to realise in Australia that there is this pressure on boys that, as you wrote down there, as you read before, and in that New South Wales article, they're the ones who are responsible for all the women's troubles. They're getting it. It's almost like you breathe it in. Every time you listen to a news report or something like that, it's there. And it's having this result of killing people.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was there was also a bit on life expectancy. In 1920, women in the United States lived 1 year longer than men. Today, women live 7 years longer than men. That's very odd. The male-female lifespan gap increased 600%. We acknowledge that blacks dying 6 years sooner than whites reflect the powerlessness of blacks in American society. Yet men dying 7 years sooner than women is rarely seen as a reflection of the powerlessness of men in American society. The 7 year gap, is it biological? If it is, it wouldn't have been just a 1 year gap in 1920. So it's not just something, it's a change that's happened. And it just so happens to coincide with the feminism that you're talking about, this second wave feminism. Righto, I'll just move on to the next one. When Time magazine ran a cover story of each of the 464 people shot in a single week, it concluded the victims were frequently those most vulnerable in society, the poor, the young, the abandoned, the ill, and the elderly. When you read that, did you think of men? One had to count the pictures to discover that 84% of the faces behind the statistics were those of men and boys. In fact, the victims were mostly poor men, young men, and abandoned men, ill men and elderly men. Yet, a woman, and only a woman, was featured on the cover. Men are the invisible victims of American violence. And I think that was the point I was trying to make there, was that no matter what the statistics, the press are pushing this the whole time. Yeah. And if you kick in on that Courier Mail there, it'll give you an idea of what...
Yeah, well, this was in the November 24th by Claire Moore, the Courier Mail on November 24th in the opinion section. As evidence before the current Senate inquiry into domestic violence is heard, the victims of family and domestic violence are overwhelmingly women. On average, one woman a week is killed as a result of partner violence. Family violence is actions or words that hurt, scare, or bully others. So it's very interesting.
Yeah. While we're on that, can I just mention something that happened to me? Back in about the late 90s, I was living in northern New South Wales, and I went into a library, and there's a big poster on the wall, and it was called "Some Men Change Their Babies." Now, it was meant to be a play on words, and it consisted of a picture of a father nursing a baby with a black eye. Now, I was outraged by this. As you can tell, I get outraged easily. And to me, it was a one-sided campaign. And I went to the local police station because it was the police department who were the ones who were doing it. I thought I'd be in for a bit of a battle. But in fact, both the male and female police officers were only too eager to help me, and they wanted me to ring Sydney headquarters on their telephone because they disagreed with the campaign themselves, saying that the majority of child abuse and assaults that they investigated were by mothers and mostly on drugs. So we give a lie to the same thing again. So you've got people here in the newspaper pushing the same theory. It's always men. And yet when you get to the people who are on the ground, they're saying exactly the opposite.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what these articles are. They're talking about how how the definition is completely different to what people perceive it as. People perceive domestic violence when the first thing that resonates in your mind is beating of the partner, beating of this. When that article just said it's words that scare or hurt, and the next article we're going to read has even more, you see that leans more towards the other side, which is not being spoken about.
Well, I'll tell you what, we've already been on this topic for 30 minutes, and we probably want to get into more of a discussion soon. I know that you've brought a heap of material with you, Lindsay, but we can't spend a whole hour on this topic. So if we want to get into the broader discussion, we'll do that. Do you want to read out that article, and then we'll get into the discussion?
I'll just read the last one out, because this was the most interesting of them all. December 1st, 2014, Courier Mail. An opinion piece by Karen Brooks. A few weeks ago, I wrote about violence in the home, the types endured, its prevalence, and the shocking statistics. Already this year, 15 women have been killed in Queensland as a consequence of what we term domestic violence. Let's just call it what it is, shall we? Abuse, cruelty, and murder. The suppression of a person's will and agency to another's. Physically, emotionally, psychologically, sexually, financially. They're the actions of cowards and bullies who try to assert control over someone they deem a piece of property over which they have exclusive rights. They conceal their brutality behind closed doors. I mean, you can't get any more sensationalist and opinionated than this, and that's what we're discussing, is that domestic violence has been, put as this loose definition. Yeah. Yet in the people's minds, it's a very specific thing, and the media and society itself is drilling it towards that it's males that are always responsible for this. Violence against women, Australia says no. All of these campaigns, it's always resonating in the minds that men are responsible for domestic violence, when the evidence suggests that domestic violence is a lot broader than we think.
Yeah, and I'd be interested to hear from our listeners. If you can put the comments underneath the show on YouTube, I'd love to hear if this is happening abroad. Because in this country for the last couple of years, there's been this massive campaign of violence against women, ending violence against women, violence against women. It's on billboards, it's on TV ads, it's everywhere. Violence against women. A couple of years ago, a pretty woman was murdered by her partner. That was somehow turned into a violence against women issue. Like it was sort of. I mean, murders happen one way or the other way all the time. This particular one was taken up as a big violence against women issue. It's a murder issue. It's murder. Just because someone happens to be female and she's been killed doesn't mean that she's been killed because she's female. I mean, it's absurd, but they've been drilling this into people so much that this is one topic I don't even bother talking about, because the brainwashing is almost complete. This is a violence against women issue, and it's the last couple of years, it's just been non-stop. Violence against women, and it ties into what we're talking about here with this attempts to break down the family unit, to break down gender roles, to turn men and women against each other. And the point that I always make is, when I rail against second wave feminism, I'm not doing that just because it harms men. I think it harms everyone, and there's good reason to believe it harms women more than it harms men. I know that you have your statistics about suicide and all of that, and I agree that's all terrible stuff. But I've got other statistics that suggest that maybe this is having a worse effect on women. Let me share with you one. This is from a Sunday Mail article from June 27, 2010. I'll read this out. This was Australians in a depressed state as antidepressant prescriptions skyrocket. Quote, antidepressant use continues to escalate in Australia, with mental health medications becoming one of the most costly classes of drugs subsidised by the Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme. In 2008-9, there were 12.3 million scripts written for antidepressants. And this is in a country of about 24 million people at the time, according to the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare's biennial report card, released last week. It shows a 46% rise in the number of prescriptions written for antidepressants and other mental health medications in Australia since it began collecting that series of data 12 years ago. Spending on mental health medications in 2008-9 accounted for 10% of the total paid out by the PPS and by the Repatriation Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme, amounting to more than $700 million, or $34 for every Australian. Here's where it gets interesting. The most common users of antidepressants in Australia are women aged between 30 and 39 years. Now, obviously, you can say, well, that doesn't mean that they're the most depressed because men might underreport or what have you, and I agree with that point. But on this basic metric, the most heavily medicated people for depression in this country today are women aged 30 to 39. Now, how on earth can anyone sit there and tell me that the changes that we've seen to society over the last 50 years are making things better for women when they are the most depressed people in the country today? You can only give me two responses. One is to agree that something has gone wrong and that they're not better off with the changes that happen in society. Or two, to argue that women are naturally predisposed to being depressed between the age of 30 to 39 and that this it doesn't have to do... I mean, which of those options do you want to take? There are a lot of people who... That's it, they're snookered now. What are they going to say? That women are naturally supposed to be depressed between 30 and 39? How ridiculous. And of course, a lot of the people who would push that argument can't because, hey, what have they been trained? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's it. That's game over. Look at that metric. 30 to 39 women are the most depressed. Now, I saw in an article just the other day in the Courier Mail, the article's title was Metro North Brisbane has highest rate of drug prescriptions for depression and anxiety in metropolitan Australia, December 11, 2014. Quote, almost 2/3 of all patients going to their GP for depression or anxiety in Brisbane are being prescribed antidepressants. Let me read that again. Almost 2/3 of all patients going to their GP for depression or anxiety in Brisbane are being prescribed antidepressants. Metro North Brisbane had the highest rate of drug prescriptions of any metro area across Australia, with 64% of patients given drugs. In Townsville, Mackay, that hits 70%. Get this. Australian Medical Association Queensland President Sean Rudd attributed Met North Brisbane's high rate of prescription to, quote, good access, and said it signified there was less stigma and the drugs were improving. Mental illness has not got the stigma it used to have, and that's why we see more mental health cases before GPs as people becoming more accepting of having treatment, he said. Dr. Rudd said GPs were treating more patients with depression and anxiety than ever, with specialists not always needed. Now, I could do an entire 90-minute podcast just ripping into this article, but the reason why I bring this up now is to say, if you add that to the article I read before, women between 30 to 39 are the most medicated people for depression in this country today, and 64% of people presenting to GPs are being handed antidepressants like it's candy. They're not even being referred to specialists. That 2 out of 3 are being told, just take this. This is sick. This country is sick. There is a sickness in this country, and these stats show that. And it all ties into what you're talking about. Our society, our culture is being destroyed, and it's so obvious. The only people who don't accept this are people with their heads in the sand. And if people don't start talking up about this, if people don't start getting active and doing something about this, where do you think it's going to head? It's going to head exactly where they've got planned for us in that book that you were talking about before. That's where we're headed, and we're pretty close to already being there right now. What say you?
Yeah, well, you both make fantastic points, and you're right, Jono. It's just the complete destruction of society, and the feminist waves that have come, and the way that all of these ideologies resonate in the youth today and society today do play a large part. But it's a whole range of things. But education in the mainstream media, celebrities on TV, the degrading of all of this, and you, Lindsay, speaking about suicide rates, how they're going through the roof with youth. You speaking about how people are, depressed, and it's just absolutely madness. And it's all done by design. This has all been done by design, and people need to get angry about it.
Without question, it's not just people like us who do our own research and skeptical of the news and are sometimes called conspiracy. It's not just us who know that this is going on. Let me read to you a quote from Mark Crispin Miller, who is the professor of media studies at New York University. And he was one of the people who was involved in Occupy Wall Street. This is a direct quote from him. Quote, "It is interesting to note that Ford and Rockefeller and the other foundations with strong CIA connections started giving grants in the early 70s to study race and gender. It was a sudden move towards identity politics by these organizations, and the theory is that the reason they did this was to balkanize the left and to prevent it from pursuing any kind of class or economic analysis." He goes on, "The rise of what we call identity politics was engineered to drive a wedge between the left and working class whites, who now perceive the academic left as focused on diversity instead of economic justice. And the estrangement also made it easy for the right to woo white workers by playing on their racism and sexual anxieties. By now, of course, the left race-gender reflex, white rightists call political correctness, is so well established that nobody thinks to question how it arose." End quote. So the point that he's making here is, not only have they driven a divide between men and women, not only have they sought to destroy the mental faculties of men and women and destroy the family unit, they've even managed to balkanize the left. They've managed to divide the people who should be fighting together. And the more you look into these things, the more you realize they do it every single time. It's all about dividing us. If you ever spout anti-male nonsense, you're helping divide us. If you ever spout violence against women nonsense, you're helping the divide. I know that you don't realize you're doing it. People who do this don't realize they're doing it, but they are pawns. They are the useful idiots of the people who want to divide us, and they want to divide us because divided we fall. It's as simple as that. It's not just us who realize this. People, if you read your books, if you look into this for yourself, you'll see. Even academics have been writing about this for decades. Yeah. It's there. Yeah. They're not going to tell you about it on the TV because they're part of the scam. It's that simple.
That's fantastic points, and we've got to stop it while we can. And this is where we've got to address it and get it. Now, Lindsay, I know you've got to take off soon. Do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah. What you were talking about the drug problem, I agree with you, and it ties in with the suicide. Males have got more tendency to suicide than go to a doctor and get drugs or whatever. That's not all males, but in general.
Yep.
The next one was the rape, the definition of rape. Now, I can remember years ago they were having, instead of, I'd always thought of rape was penetration. But no. One of the definitions I read, it was a bit like the ones you read out of the Courier Mail here, was if a female had ever seen an exposed penis in public, that was rape. And I thought, this is really bad, because this is denigrating the problems that have happened to women who have actually been raped. It belittles them, and that upset me. To me, I consider rape almost on a par with murder, and I think they should be treated that way, and it would put a stop to it. But this redefining things to make them, so that 4/5 of the women in the world have all been raped. Bullshit. It's just nonsense. That sort of gets up my nose.
Yeah. Where did you see that you were just referring to, that definition of rape?
Oh, this was a long time ago when I was when I got this book.
Well, what we'll have to do is make sure, if you can, during the week, see if you can track that one down. And again, we'll provide the links for all information in the info box under the show. Now, you do have to take off. Thank you so much for bringing this in. We've been wanting to do the feminism topic for a long time. We'll have to spend more time on it again, because I can see we've only got through a fraction of what you wanted to talk about.
That's all right.
But, any final thoughts before you take off?
No, that's it. I'll give you copies of books and things like that people can look up. There was another book. When you're talking about depression, and I was just thinking, this other book by this woman called Smith, she makes the point that men are giving up, particularly men your age, are just giving up on women. They just had enough of walking away. Now, that in effect is depressing women, because the women in general have a higher expectation of marriage than men do. And suddenly you've got nobody there. They're saying there is nobody. And it's because the men are just saying, no, I'm not interested anymore. And that really does worry me. And that's exactly, you keep coming back to this all the time, that's designed to destroy us so we don't reproduce. Yeah. The fewer there are of us reproducing, the easier it is for the people who control things.
Absolutely.
They don't have to murder us, we just stop reproducing.
Well, I've got a feeling we'll be talking more about this one next week. Lindsay, thank you so much.
That's all right, you're
company.
welcome. And I'll say goodbye.
I'd love to take you to the door and say goodbye, but we've got to get on with the show. If you'll excuse us, we'll...
Yes.
Yep.
See you then, fellas.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you very much, Lindsay.
Now, that's the domestic segment taken care of, Ethan. We'll move straight into international, because we are way behind schedule at the moment. Obviously, during the week, the US Senate or their Congress, or one of their government bodies, released the report into CIA torture. And I can see you've got some information there. Do you want to get the ball rolling?
Yep. For me, this was one of the biggest things that I've seen this week, potentially, this year, that finally, after all these years of campaigning and doing all of this, it's finally come out. Now, earlier this week, and I'm sure most of our listeners domestically and internationally would have seen this, the full extent of the CIA's interrogation and detention programs launched in the wake of the September 11th terrorist attacks, so-called terrorist attacks, was laid bare in a milestone report by the Senate Intelligence Committee that concluded the agency's use of torture was brutal and ineffective, and that the CIA repeatedly lied about its usefulness. Detainees were forced to stand on broken limbs for hours, kept in complete darkness, deprived of sleep for up to 180 hours, sometimes standing, sometimes with their arms shackled above their heads. Prisoners were also subjected to, quote, rectal feeding without medical necessity. Rectal exams were conducted with, quote, excessive force, and the report highlights one prisoner later diagnosed with anal fissures, chronic hemorrhoids, and symptomatic rectal prolapse. The report mentions more mock executions, Russian roulette, US agents threatening to slit throat of detainees' mothers, sexually abuse and threatening prisoners' children. One prisoner died of hypothermia brought on, in part by being forced to sit on the bare concrete floor without pants, and this is already on top of all of the public knowledge about techniques such as waterboarding and all of the other techniques that have come to light through leaks and through whistleblowers as well. Now, the Senate's committee's report and subsequent remarks made this week by lawmakers have indicated that no CIA officials have ever been reprimanded or held accountable whatsoever for interrogating detainees with torturous tactics. Quote, CIA officers and CIA contractors who were found to have violated CIA policies or performed poorly were rarely held accountable or removed from positions of responsibility, a portion of the report reads. CIA managers who were aware of failings and shortcomings in the program but did not intervene, or who failed to provide proper leadership and management were also not held to account, reads another expert on 2 occasions. Accountability recommendations were overruled by senior CIA leadership, including the incidents in which the prisoner froze to death on the concrete floor. As detailed in the study, there was no accountability for personnel responsible for the extended detention of individuals determined by the CIA to have been wrongfully detained, reads another portion. And to this day, no CIA official who has participated in the torture program has been held accountable for that, which is absolutely appalling. It's just unbelievable. Now, before I start to go into a more specific range of this, Jono, what are your thoughts on this report coming out so far?
Well, wait, the first thing that I thought when it came out was, what laws are they going to try and pass this week that they don't want us focusing on? You know, whenever the right hand's doing something dodgy, we'll look at what the left hand is doing as well. And I have been trying to pay attention to see what laws are getting passed in the US. And so far, I haven't seen the smoking gun. I haven't found whatever it is they're trying to do. But I think to myself, why would they release this? Why are they releasing it now? I mean, the fact that at Guantanamo and God knows how many other places around the world, the US and their allies have been engaged in all kinds of atrocious, dehumanizing torture. We already knew that. And there's really nothing in this report that I couldn't have imagined anyhow.
That's right.
In fact, I'll ask you a question, Ethan. Do you even think that this report really told us the worst of what they do?
No, I think most of it remains secret.
No, and so this to me just comes across as a blatant, limited hangout operation. They only do those for set reasons, and one of those set reasons is to cover other things up, to get our attention on other things. So the first thing I thought when I heard about all of this was, well, what else are they up to?
Yeah.
And I mean, just looking at this report on its own, though, in isolation, any moral claims that the US or her allies had to being the good guys, like anyone who was still stupid enough to believe that utter nonsense, how... There's so much evidence that that's not the case. I don't think that this is going to change their opinions. If you're so dumb that you think that the West is good, that the US is good, that Australia is good, if you think that we're the good guys on the international stage, this report's not going to change your mind, because you don't have a mind. You're a moron, and this report's not going to change anyone's opinions on anything. I think we already know. You either know what's going on or you don't.
Yeah.
So this report, why has it been released? That's the big question for me.
And I thought that you were going to say something along the lines of that, because I thought the exact same thing when it was released, and a couple of things came to my mind. One was, we've spoken on previous podcasts about how people are just being passively accepted, passively programmed to accept this as normal. As we spoke about USS Liberty. Well, yeah, that's just what happened. That's just history now. Get over it. And people go, yeah, that's just what happened. Why would you say any different? They've released this, and now this is just what's happened. They're not going to talk about how over the last decade we've been demonized, we've been unlegitimized with what we've said about torture in Guantanamo Bay, about all of these techniques. It's been completely conspiracy theorist, and now, that's just what happened, and this is what we're doing, and you're not going to do a damn thing about it, are you? And that's why it's plastered all over our mainstream media, because I saw it as just a way to rub it in our face, and as a distraction from something else.
Yeah, and we said this before on the show so many times. They usually do these kinds of things with more than one motivation at play. And I completely agree with you. On the one hand, what else are they trying to cover up? That's obvious. But two, get it into the public consciousness. Get people aware of this. They know that people aren't going to rise up about it. But now people know for certain the things that they should have already suspected anyhow, that the people who run their country are brutal, evil people, psychopathic people. If you can do this to other humans, you are psychopathic. There's something not wrong with your mind. Now they know that about their own government, but at the moment, the government is only using this bad stuff on the bad guys. Well, who else are bad guys? Anyone who threatens the state itself, right? So, like David Cameron said, people who think that 9/11 was a Jewish plot, people who think the 7/7 official story is nonsense, those kind of people are on notice now. Look, we're going to officially tell you what we do to people we don't like. And remember how we said a few months ago, we don't like you. So I think there's an element of that there as well. Trying to get this into people's minds. Look what we will do.
Yeah. And absolutely, I completely agree. And it's still one of the most important issues that any critical thinkers are going to be targeted, and that this is just coming out. But I wanted to relate this, and I'll just go through this quickly because I know we don't have much timed because the last 2 points are really important to get through.
This is an important topic. We should probably decide now, because I want you to go through all the information you've got. This is a really important topic. I'm happy to go beyond 90 minutes, because obviously Lindsay's segment went a bit longer than we had planned. So I'm happy to go beyond the 90 minutes if you want to make sure you get all your material out there, because this is a really important topic.
Yeah, well, it won't take too long. It's just in case, because I wanted to relate this related to something that happened in Australia this week, which also, is a representation of this whole unlegitimised claims over the past 10 years and now how it's been normalised. And it relates to, we had the Human Rights Awards here in Sydney this week. The Human Rights Awards happened, and as this report just so happens to come out the exact week that the Human Rights Award are happening, and as the key speaker, my good buddy Attorney General George Brandis, who's the key figure of passing all of these anti-terrorism legislation laws which take away all of our human rights, was one of the key speakers at this. He can't make it up, but I did want to relate this because David Hicks has now got media attention again, and I'll give a background on David Hicks. Particularly for some of our international listeners, Hicks is an Australian who was convicted by the United States Guantanamo Military Commission under the controversial Military Commissions Act of 2006 on charges of providing material support for terrorism. Hicks was detained by the United States in Guantanamo Bay detention camp from 2001 until 2007 before returning to Australia to serve the remainder of his sentence. He became one of the first people charged and subsequently convicted under this act, and there was widespread Australian and international criticism and political controversy over his treatments, the evidence tendered against him, his trial outcome, and the newly created legal system under which he was prosecuted. Now, we could speak perhaps in another episode about the blatant propaganda and manipulation associated with the whole situation, but don't want to get off track at the moment. I just want to focus on the basic facts. In October 2012, the United States Court of Appeal ruled that the charge under which Hicks had been convicted was invalid because the law did not exist at the time of the offence, and it could not be applied retrospectively. Hicks entered an Alford plea, which is not confessing to doing it, but admitting that the evidence against you would be enough to convict you, but not actually saying that you are guilty of the crime, to a newly codified charge of providing material support for terrorism. Hicks' legal team attributed his acceptance of the plea bargain to his, quote, desperation for release from Guantanamo, end quote, and duress under, quote, instances of severe beatings, sleep deprivation, and other conditions of detention that contravene international human rights norms. Now, I met Hicks when he was here in Brisbane promoting his book, and for years, the mainstream establishment continuously did all they could to not allow his claims of torture to be legitimised in the eyes of the public, and that alone is obviously enough to make anyone sick. That David Hicks, it come 5.5 years, and I'd spoken to him myself, and he's not the best person with social interactions. It messed him up something bad, and his book came out where he was speaking about this because he was on a 1-year gag order. He wasn't allowed to talk when he was released. Now, the reason I brought up Hicks is because in the wake of the Senate report being released, he's been given attention again. I've touched on that. And for the 2014 Human Rights Award in Sydney, Brandis was a key speaker, and David Hicks was there to do a speech as well, now that he's got mainstream attention for this, and heckled the Attorney General at the conclusion of his speech to know what Brandis had to say about a damning CIA report that was released. Hicks told Guardian Australia that Australian officials knew the entire time, which is what he's been saying for years. Hicks shouted, "My name is David Hicks and I was tortured for 5.5 years in Guantanamo Bay in the full knowledge of your party. What do you have to say?" This was at the conclusion of Brandis' speech, and Brandis was walking off, ignoring him, and the moderators had to say, look, you're going to have your chance to speak and everything like this, but Hicks is getting mainstream attention, and this did relate to the releasing of it, but the bottom line is this, as we've said, it's all been common knowledge. WikiLeaks released reports about this, and they released the Guantanamo files. WikiLeaks, the website, and you can say what you want about WikiLeaks, but that was a fantastic release that they did, which even categorised that there was children in Guantanamo Bay from the files.
Yeah, and Justice for Germans, who's one of our regular listeners, just made a comment in the live chat box that those same WikiLeaks releases revealed that all the Australians had to do was ask, and they could have had Hicks released. You know what I mean?
That's right.
Like, the information that our government are utterly, utterly corrupt and evil. It's been there for a while. There's so much evidence. If people can't see that by now, they're never going to see it.
And I don't have the exact details in front of me, but through my research from this, the notion at the time was that this Hicks case was really hurting Howard's popularity rating and whatnot. It was hurting the government because he hadn't been convicted yet. He was like Bradley Manning while he was detained and hadn't been convicted. So Hicks hadn't been convicted yet, and it was, as you said, all it was a matter of Australia using their diplomatic ties to bring Hicks home. And as this started to get media coverage at the time of Hicks and how Howard is just, he's so inhumane because he could just bring him home, he hasn't been convicted, this is an Australian citizen. What happened was, at the exact same time this happened, all of a sudden Hicks was convicted, and then that was the end of it. 5.5 years, he was away. And now, after all the years that we've said all of this, it's being normalised, and for people like George Brandis and everything to try and justify these actions, and for the CIA directors to justify these actions, saying that we saved people's lives doing this, makes me sick.
Yeah, it's utterly ridiculous. And look, the whole Hicks story is one I haven't looked into for a while, but from memory, his father worked day and night tirelessly trying to campaign on behalf of his son to try and get him released because he knew that what was happening there was wrong, utterly wrong, and he was a true champion as far as being good parents or good family go. He was a true champion for the cause. His son had done something very stupid, which is go over and train with a terrorist organisation overseas. As far as I'm concerned, any time that you sign up to get weapons and training to kill other people, there's probably something wrong with you. And if you're dumb enough to go and do that with an enemy of your state, that's real stupidity. But that's what it is, stupidity. It does not deserve 5 years of torture in Guantanamo where, a good man can barely imagine what might happen there.
Yeah.
You don't even want to think about it. Who knows what goes on in places like that? 5 years of that being abandoned by his country. I mean, it's an atrocious story, but one good thing to come out of it is his father and the fact that there are still people out there who, even when their family are, foolish enough to go and do such stupid things, they will fight against the state because it's the right thing to do. It's still out there to an extent, and that's good to see.
And just before, I'll just do my final thoughts just before we move on. One thing that Hicks told me was that the worst technique that they did to him was they tied him up and they just let a drop of water drop onto his forehead. And he said that after 3 days, that one drop of water felt like a sledgehammer was hitting your head because you were just completely bound and they just had a tap above you where a drop of water was hitting you right where the third eye is, right where the pineal gland is. And after 3 days, he said it drove him insane because it felt like someone was smashing a sledgehammer. This is what he went through for 3.5 years, stuff like this.
It's utterly sick stuff. Like I said, only sick people could want to have this happen. And you can go into experiments on social psychology and how, so long as people are getting orders, they'll do whatever they're told to do. I'm not talking specifically about the officers who did this, although even those people, I think there has to be something wrong with them.
Absolutely.
But the people who authorize it, the people who make this happen, the people who know that it's happening, the people who lie about it, those people at the top, the people who I call government, that is utterly sick stuff. It's disgusting. Anyone who supports this government or any government like it, there's something wrong with you. You need to have a real hard think about who it is that's in charge of this place, because they're not good people. They're the ones taking your taxes every week. They're the ones that you're supporting with your taxes every week. They're the ones who are responsible for stuff like this. It doesn't have to be this way. It's only this way because we support them with our labour and with our taxes. It's that simple.
Yep.
Now, I'm glad you brought that topic up because I had a sneaking suspicion that you would, which is why I didn't cover it. The thing that I wanted to talk about today, and I hope you're willing to stick around a little bit longer than usual just to make sure we get this stuff out there, is the climate talks that are taking place in Peru as we speak. Now, look, it's up to you, Ethan. We can keep this to 90 minutes. I can save this for next week, or we can extend this a little bit beyond. It's entirely up to you.
Personally, I'd like to do more research on it and come back next week.
You know what? We're going to make next week a big climate change, global warming home special.
I'm more than happy to do that.
I'll save this material then for next week, so listeners tune in for that one. We're going to go down the rabbit hole with this global warming business, and I'm telling you right now, it's even crazier than I thought. I was doing the research for this show. it is even crazier and more blatant than even I thought. So look forward to that one. That's next week. We'll do what I call the global warming scam, and maybe Ethan will come and he'll say no. It's all legitimate. We can have a big debate.
My closet green supporter comes out.
All right, so climate change next week. All right, in that case, one more topic I want to discuss. Today is, of course, the anniversary of what I call the Sandy hoax. Now, Ethan, I've mentioned a few times on this show that to me this is a blatant hoax. The media and certain agencies, either within the government or being contracted by the government, were complicit in this. It was a big conspiracy, if you want to call it that, but a blatant one. And anyone who looks at Wayne Carver, the so-called medical examiner, anyone who looks at Robbie Parker, the so-called father, the alleged father of one of the slain victims, anyone who looks at these people and their reactions, and the footage is there for anyone to see, anyone who looks at that and comes away and doesn't have any questions about it, that there's no hope for that person. This is so blatant what they've done and what they've gotten away with. I'll give you an example. Wayne Carver, when he was giving his speech, the police in the background, now this is a guy who supposedly was just examining dead bodies, 20 dead children supposedly. As he's given his speech, he's got police in the background giggling like schoolgirls. I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
Now, sadly, this is a podcast, so people can't see what I'm about to provide them with. But even the audio should be enough to make people who haven't looked at this before question what it is that's going on here. So I'm going to play a clip of Dr. Wayne Carver, the so-called medical examiner from that incident. And once I've done that, I'll get into a broader discussion about what's going on here. Just bear with me there, folks. I'll bring this audio clip up.
It's just unbelievable.
All right, so I've got the clip ready. Sorry about that little delay there, guys. I'm going to play 1 minute of Dr. Wayne Carver's press conference after examining 20 dead bodies. Listen to this.
What were they wearing? They're wearing kid stuff.
Doctor, the children that you autopsied, where on the bodies were they wearing?
All over.
How many boys and how many girls?
It's H. Wayne, W-A-Y-N-E. Carver, C-A-R-V-E-R. And it's the second. And that's why I don't use the H, because when my father asked my grandfather, he said, fine, but as long as you never call him Harold.
Unbelievable.
It wasn't a tent. It was this magnificent thing. We have 3 vehicles and a lot of guys to drive them. We're actually, one of the highlights of my administration is that we make them as nondescript and unmarked as possible. Just to foil you guys.
You don't have evidence?
I just...
You don't know? You're checking it.
It wasn't a tent. It was this magnificent thing. No, I don't. Sorry, I don't.
How young was the youngest victim?
All right, now that one, look, again for the audience, if you couldn't hear the questions that were being asked, maybe his responses didn't seem as absurd as they were, but basically he was asked, what were the kids wearing? And he said, kid stuff. He was asked, how many boys and how many girls? I don't know. The guy who supposedly was examining 20 dead bodies from the shooting is asked how many boys and how many girls, and he says, I don't know. He starts carrying on about how he's got very good photographers, laughing, giggling, a whole bunch of really weird stuff. Now, that in and of itself doesn't prove that this was a big hoax. I completely agree with anyone out there who's saying that. Just because this guy is acting utterly ridiculously doesn't mean this is a hoax. I completely agree. But the reason why I play that clip and the reason why I recommend that clip to people who aren't familiar with all of this is because that should be the first thing that gets you to start wondering about what's happened here. Because that was the case for me. I saw Wayne Carver's press, and when I saw that clip, I was like, I need to see the whole clip now. Like, maybe they're just taking this out of context. The whole thing's crazy. The whole time he's got police in the background laughing. So then I watched the Robbie Parker footage, the supposed father of Emily Parker. The guys, this is the night of, or the night after, his daughter has just been brutally shot, supposedly, along with 19 of her fellow school kids, laughing and smiling as he walks up to the press release, the press conference. Then once he gets there, he takes a big breath and then gets into character and starts talking slowly. And it's the most It's so hard for me to describe, which is why I say to people, just go to YouTube and look up Wayne Carver, Sandy Hook interview. Look up Robbie Parker, Sandy Hook interview. Those 2 pieces of footage should be enough to make you think, hold on, there's something else going on here. And once you do that, there's so much information out there to be very clear to anyone with an open mind, this was a complete and utter staged event. Now, that's very hard for people to accept because, hey, think of the consequences of that.
Yeah.
That means that they're lying to us. That means the government are involved. I mean, it's too hard for the average mind to comprehend. The cognitive dissonance takes over. And instead of accepting that this is evidence, clear and blatant evidence, and there's so much of it, this was a staged event, they push it to the side. They deride anyone who believes that this is a conspiracy, as a conspiracy theorist crazy. Because once you do grapple, if you have the mental fortitude to grapple with what we're dealing with here, you realize this is big trouble stuff. If the government thinks they can get away with this, they have such little respect for us. They're using it to take away people's guns in America. Why are they doing that? The reasons are obvious. The reason why I focus so much on Sandy Hook is because this is, I think, the game changer. This is the one where they went all out. At least with 9/11, buildings actually did fall. Probably. At least an event actually happened that they were reporting on.
Yep.
This is one where there was no event. It was entirely staged. And the further you look into it, the more people you realize who are involved, the bigger the agenda. Then you get into talking about Boston bombings. Then you get into the Aurora shooting. Then you see the links between all of these events. All of the pieces start fitting together. And I'm the first to concede that if you're not used to any of this material and you're first being confronted by it, it seems crazy, okay? That was the exact response that I would have had a couple of years ago. What? You're telling me that the whole thing was staged, that no one died, no one got hurt, that the media were in on the whole thing, that no one's discovered, no one's come out and publicly... Like, do you really want me to believe all of that? Yeah, that's hard to accept until you start studying things like the USS Liberty and how many people were able to keep that secret. Until you look into things like the Gulf of Tonkin and how many people were able to keep that secret, how the media was complicit in it. Big secrets actually can be kept pretty well. And this secret wouldn't have to be that big because Sandy Hook is such a small little town. You look at the amount of money that all the families have been paid. That same Robbie Parker interview that I was press conference I was talking about, he immediately says during that press conference, a friend of mine has set up a donate page. Like, this is within, 24 hours of his kid being dead. One of his friends has set up a donate page to give him money. What for? The kid's dead.
Yeah.
If the story is true, the kid's dead. What is giving him money achieve? Well, all of those families have GoFundMes or donate accounts or whatever you call them. They've all made millions, and that's just the stuff that we officially know about. We don't know what other money might be coming their way. Now, I know people who do some really terrible things just to make a quick buck. We all know of them. They're all around society. People, for a few $100s, will do this, will steal that, will rip other people off for just a few $100s. You dangle millions in front of people, and you better believe there are people out there who are sick enough and depraved enough that they will go along with this scam, and that's exactly what's happened. And I say that it's a game changer because just a few weeks ago, as we discussed a few episodes ago, that documentary was released called We Need to Talk About Sandy Hook. And it's almost 3 hours in length. It was a collaborative effort by a whole bunch of bloggers and YouTubers and independent researchers who came together to make the documentary. And I think that's one of the things that's so powerful about it. This isn't just some crazy dude who sits at home and takes videos out of context. This isn't some website that makes money like Alex Jones, pushing the fear porn over. This is just a bunch of people who still have functioning brains who decided, hey, that doesn't make sense what I just saw, I'm going to look into it. Then when they found out the truth of what was going on, they had the strength of character to say, well, I'm not going to pretend this isn't happening. Yep. I'd rather be called a conspiracy theorist and know that I'm being honest with myself and the material in front of me than put my head in the sand and pretend I didn't find this out. Once you find this out, those are your two choices. Be gutless or be a real person. Be a true person, be a strong person, a good character. That's what these people have done. A whole bunch of them got together, they made this documentary. If you still think Sandy Hook was real, that 20 kids died, or 26 kids, or whatever it was died, if you think that some scrawny kid called Adam Lanza shot all of these kids, that none of them had to be taken to hospital because everyone that he shot died, there were no victims who just had bullet wounds, everyone that he shot died at the scene, no ambulances were required to take the bodies away from... Look, I'm just going through the very top of the story.
Yep.
Like, this is just the tip of the iceberg. No ambulances needing to be taken from the school to the hospital. Everyone who's shot dies. All this by a kid called Adam Lanza, some 15-year-old. None of this stuff makes sense. They bulldoze a school in a literal cover-up. I mean, and again, this is the tip of the iceberg, people. Yep. You need to look into this because this does change everything. If you have the moral character to be honest about it, this will change everything. And I think they've overreached this time. I think they haven't shut down the internet as quickly as maybe they would have planned. And too many people are waking up to this now. Far too many people know that Sandy Hook was a hoax, and it's spreading like wildfire because the evidence is undeniable. And what happens if even 2 or 3% of the US population wakes up to the fact that this was a scam? Because once you wake up to this, you're not apathetic anymore. Like, once you know that Sandy Hook was a hoax, you can't be apathetic because you realise what's going on. So if even 2 or 3% of the US population wakes up to the Sandy Hook hoax, there could be some big problems for the people who clearly have more hoaxes staged. And this year we've seen the Cassidy Stay one, we've seen the Elliot Roger one, we've seen the Moncton shooting. There are these hoaxed events going on more and more and more. Clearly they're working towards an agenda, and I think that agenda might be destroyed if people get the word out about Sandy Hook. Ethan, what say you?
Yeah, well, I remember the day Sandy Hook happened. And right from the very first day, there was just troubling inconsistencies everywhere from the first day. And we watched Parker's speech live on television. And what did they cut out? The first part where he was laughing and joking and then said, all right, let's go. And then gets into character. The live press conference started on television over here from when he was beginning and was in character. And everything, the inconsistencies, the donate pages being set up the day before it happened, all of this stuff happening. And the final nail in the coffin was when the FBI released a report saying no children died, that there was no deaths in that state, in that area, in the year that it happened. There was no deaths at all. The FBI report was 0. And that was the final nail in the coffin.
I haven't seen that particular thing that you're referring to.
I'll
it
link
wouldn't
to
surprise me at all. Make sure you give me the link
I'll
so I can link
to
to that.
into that. But the FBI had to come out because there was no one died. So they had to come out and say because no one died in that state.
Yeah, and look, again, we're only touching on the surface elements here. I could sit here for an hour and go through more and more undeniable evidence about certain people, their aliases, what they've been doing online to try and hide their scam. It's really incredible stuff. The further you get down the rabbit hole with this one, the more you see that it's links to other events. Really, if you have a spare hour or two and anything close to an open mind or a functioning brain, look into this one. It is so blatant what they've done.
Yeah, I know.
It is just incredible, incredible stuff. One more name you want to check out is Gene Rosen, who is the character who supposedly has a house right near the school that the kids ran to. But then the story was, oh no, a bus driver dropped off the kids at this guy's house, supposedly after the shooting. You can see video testimony from Gene Rosen where his story changes from testimony to testimony, and this is one of the few witnesses who was put on TV constantly. He can't even get his own story straight. There's even video footage of him clearly practicing his lines and the guy behind the camera correcting him. Do you know what I mean? It's just so ridiculous.
Yep.
No one with a functioning brain and an open mind can look at all of this and walk away without realizing this was a staged event. And that's where the fun really begins. That's where the fun began for me all those months or years ago. Because from there you look further into things, and this is just the tip of the iceberg, Ethan.
Yep.
Tip of the iceberg.
And from personal experience, when I was trained as a journalist, and I've, you know me, John, I'm a very thorough person. I'm a very factual-based person who won't make a conclusion unless I've looked at both sides of the story and have all the facts down. And for some people out there that may find it hard that Sandy Hook was a hoax, when you actually do the research, it's undeniable. You can at least admit to yourself that the official story is a complete fairy tale, that there's no possible way that it could have happened the way they described. And once you go down the rabbit hole, from personal experience, do the research and you'll come to the same conclusion that we did.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So I'm happy to state here on live broadcast, on a podcast that anyone can listen to, right now, I'm happy to state Sandy Hook was a staged event. I'd be happy to say that on TV. If they were to ever put someone like me on TV, which they never would, I will happily go on there. No mask, no nothing. I'll rock up just how I normally dress. I'll sit down there. You can put anyone in front of me, any of the fake crisis actors, any attacker, any Bill O'Reilly type character. I'm happy to go on. I'd be happy to go on air with anyone. The evidence that this was a staged event is so blatantly obvious, and that's why they'll never put you on TV to debate this. Never in a million years, because they haven't got a leg to stand on it, and they know it. And I'm happy to stay right now. Sandy Hook, clearly staged event, clearly a hoax, no question about it.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So remember to check out that We Need to Talk About Sandy Hook. If you haven't already seen it, of course, that's getting taken down all over the net.
Yeah.
It's been taken down on YouTube time and time again. It was taken down on Vimeo. The problem is it's out there now. It's out there on torrents. And there's hundreds of seeders. One can only imagine how many times this has been downloaded. Could be a game changer. If you haven't seen it yet, We Need to Talk About Sandy Hook.
Isn't it ironic that the Pirate Bay gets shut down?
Yeah, it's
just as
interesting timing.
Sandy Hook is circulating everywhere. You say it's a game changer, all of a sudden Pirate Bay gets taken down.
Very interesting coincidence. I'd note that also forums like Godlike Productions, which is it is probably the biggest internet in English conspiracy site on the internet. I noticed that was down recently. I read that it was. They shadow banned me a long time ago from that forum. But it is an interesting coincidence, and I don't think they can stop it now.
Yeah.
All they're going to do is the old Barbra Streisand effect. If they try and ban it, it just makes more people want to get their hands on it. And unlike Loose Change, which was released 5 years after 9/11, this has been released less than 2 years after Sandy Hook, when the hoax is still on. They're still using this to push gun control. They're still using this to get money. The families still come out for money. Yeah. That's why this is so dangerous. That's why it wouldn't surprise me if they tried to take down Pirate Bay. I'm not saying that is the case, but it wouldn't surprise me at all.
Well, it's a coincidence.
This video is too powerful. You need to get yourself a copy. Once you've seen it, once you've verified everything for yourself, you need to share it around, because this is a game changer. Now, we have to wrap up the show now. We have gone over the 90 minutes. We apologise for that. Time to move on to the final thoughts. Now, I've got a few final thoughts. Ethan, do you have anything you want to leave the audience with?
No, I think we've encompassed everything today.
Excellent. Well, I've got a few things I want to get through, so just bear with me here. Firstly, Mick Raven at Conspiracy Oz. I've been meaning to organise a time to do an interview with him for his podcast or for ours. I'll put a link in the info box of our video to his work. It's just conspiracyoz.com. He does a 1-hour show on a Sunday and a 30-minute show on a Wednesday, and is the only other person in Australia that I'm aware of who's doing anything like this. Like, as far as I know, it's yourself, myself, Lindsay, and Mick Raven down in the northern beaches of Sydney, wherever he is doing his show, and that's it. You know what I mean? It's so important that we all support each other. So if you haven't already checked out Conspiracy Oz podcast, check that out, and I'll try and get on the show with him as soon as I can. The next point is that I was going to say that I want to do part 2 of the Ukraine turmoil next week, but if we're doing climate change, that might have to get pushed back again, but I'm really looking forward to that one. Yeah. And finally, one more point I want to make, and we touched on this last week with Raja B when he was on the show, and that is that if you look at the timing of Edward Snowden when he came out, and the way that he made us all so scared about what the government has on us, blah, 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 then you look at the timing of these blatant hoaxes like Sandy Hook, Boston bombings, Aurora shootings. I don't think that was a coincidence anymore. I think they want us to be scared. I think they know that if even a small percentage of us start doing like what we're doing now, then the game's up. Yeah. Which is why I implore everyone who's listening to this to get themselves a USB microphone. They don't cost much. Lindsay bought himself one for $50. You know what I mean? A USB mic, that's all you need. You can do your own podcast. You can do your own shows. There's no reason not to, guys. And the more of us who do this now, the better. It's really time for those of us who've been thinking about doing a podcast to do them. Those of us who've been thinking about doing videos, it's time to start doing them right now, because worse things are going to come. They are going to try and shut down the internet. There's no question about it. We need to get this out like wildfire beforehand. And all it takes is everyone who's listening, just do one show a month if that's all you can do. If you want to get in touch with us, we'll promote your show. The more people who are doing this, the better. And that's what I want to see, is more people doing this kind of work.
Yeah. I do have a final thought, actually. I think it's an appropriate medium to let slip. I've been scripting a few documentaries that I want to do now that I've got the microphones and the cameras ready. And one of them is going to extensively look at how anyone that critically thinks the system's going to be shut down soon. And I think that's the most vital thing that we can talk about at the moment, relating to David Cameron, the anti-terrorism legislation, how everything is going to be flipped to demonise people that question the system. So I want to do at least, a half an hour, 40-minute sort of in-depth documentary on it, examining everything. And there's a whole range of other documentaries that I want to do. So TOTT News isn't inactive. There's a lot of things going on, and the Australian Roundtable podcast is still going to be here every week, hopefully for as long as we can go.
Yeah, until they shut us down. And look, let's be honest, we've made it to 10 episodes now, plus the entire G20 coverage. So this is 13 episodes that we've done. We've actually lasted longer than I thought we would. Obviously, we haven't got enough subscribers, so keep spreading the word, everyone. If you're listening to this, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We're up to over 250 now. So thank you to everyone who has been subscribing and promoting the show. Word of mouth is such a powerful tool for getting the news out there. So please, if you like the show, put it on Facebook, put it on Twitter, tell your friends about it. If you're on the phone to someone, tell them about it. The more people getting this out there, the better. Thank you to everyone who's been doing that so far. I'm done with my final thoughts. I can't wait for next week's segment about climate change. So please, everyone, tune into that one. It's going to be a ripper. Thank you so much to all the listeners. We've been checking the comments. Thanks to Justice for Germans. Thanks to Jade. And thanks to all the other people who've been posting comments in the live chat box. We appreciate all of it. And we'll see you guys 4 p.m. Sunday next week, Australian Eastern Standard Time, for the Australian Roundtable podcast.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.